I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Primary day in four states across the country. Special election in a fifth. Kansas, Washington, Michigan, and Missouri, all with primaries. Ohio, the 12th Congressional District, up for grabs. And the amazing story here, John Kasich's old district, one that hasn't seen a Democrat in that seat since when Reagan was president. At the beginning, one of those seats swept away by the Reagan Revolution, if you will. Could be the other way now. Interestingly enough, could be the Trump Revolution or counter-revolution, however you want to look at that, as a lot of those 1,000+ seats that were lost during the Obama years, well, maybe they come back home under the Trump years. And I'll tell you, I look at this and the hope is about damn time. Because what we're seeing coming out of D.C., well, I shouldn't even say D.C. anymore, because Trump isn't in D.C. He's in Bedminster, New Jersey at his golf club, working vacation, sitting on the golden throne, doing the Twitter thing, which everybody wants him to stop except me. Please continue your Twitter rants. Please continue the craziness that is coming out of your administration. Please continue. March right on forward, good sir. But lots of things to watch tonight. For me, the number one thing, obviously, Proposition A in Missouri, which would push back their horrible no rights at work law. One of the things that caught my attention, and I've been following it throughout the day, some of the messaging, the Chamber of Commerce, the Republican Party, a bunch of their flacks. One of the things that grabbed my attention and really, I think, sums up the entire no rights at work argument. Evidently, labor has spent somewhere between $12 and $15 million on this campaign to push back against this horrible ideological piece of legislation. And this person, and it's been kind of a theme of saying that, the fact that unions have $15 million to spend on anything political is the reason that you have to have Janus and the no rights at work and all of this anti-union stuff, because they have the ability to fight back. And this was, one of those things that really caught my attention, in that, that's the real aim here. It's to neuter, it's to control, it's to silence anyone who has the audacity, the unmitigated gall to stand up and say, you know what, we want better wages, hours, conditions. We want a government that works for all. We want to help the poor, the downtrodden. We want to do the right things. Heaven forbid that there be someone out there with even a little bit of power to stand up to the moneyed interests. And it got me again, looking at this, going back to my grandfather, who always said, if a rich guy is gonna spend $1 to tell you don't need something, you better spend $2 to get it. This is one of those moments. It's one of those moments where you better spend $2 to get and keep the laws the way they were. Because what we know, and we know this beyond adventure, we know this beyond exception, that right-to-work states have lower wages, they have less health care, they have lower retirement security rates. All of the negatives through the roof. Lower health care, higher infant mortality rates, shorter life expectancies. You go down the list of all of the negatives, and bang, there they are. In fact, I think it was 9 of the 10 poorest states are no rights at work states. And, I look at this and I go, it's right in front of you. And if you're the folks in Missouri, and I hope you voted the right way, we soon will be getting the results. I'm hoping, because this would be a serious blow come November. This is one of those moments where it could be a great messaging. It could be a good lift that you were able to begin the pushback, the turnaround. But my fear if it goes the wrong way, because understand, the moneyed interests have been spending $15 million probably a month for the last 40 years to get to this moment. They have been spending like drunken sailors on leave to get to this moment. This is their big score. This is their power grab. This is them saying, you know what? We're now in control. And the voters have a chance. And I keep coming back to that frame. That, the fact that the unions have any money whatsoever to defend themselves is the reason that we need to destroy them. That's what they want for not just the union people, not just the unions themselves, but for all of us. And sadly, I think too many people, and I was just thinking about this today as I was driving in, where they've trained us to immediately, like Pavlovian dogs, anytime you hear the word union, you just kind of freeze up and I don't know, because they've scared us. They've feared people into no, we can't have that. That's bad. And one of the problems that I've been saying unions have had for a very long time, and this has to change at some point. And one of the reasons that I started this program almost 13 years ago is that unions do some really good things. And I talk about what union membership has meant in my life. The fact that I grew up in a housing project and I now live in a neighborhood with doctors and lawyers. I live in my children are never going to see the poverty and the violence and the destitution and all of that and the desperation that I grew up in. None of that. Because the work that I did was paid at a reasonable rate. I worked hard, I played by the rules, and guess what? Got ahead. And I'm not bragging. I think everyone should have that opportunity. And, recently I gave a speech, to some Teamster brothers and sisters in Alaska, where, they brought me out to say, hey, preach the good word, Brother Smith. And I said, look, every one of us should be holding on to this union card like NRA members, like we're led to believe NRA members hold on to their union cards. Out of my cold, dead hands, because the reality is, without that card, could be someday cold, dead hands. You look at how many people go into retirement without the security to be able to live on, and you look at what we're doing as a government, it's mind-blowing to me. And, one of these things that the unions have really done a very poor job is promoting themselves and saying, these are our stories, and having workers who are going to stand up and say, and, as I talked about when I came back from Alaska, there was a woman who gave a presentation before me, and she did a really fantastic job. But she ended on a quote from one of the kids from the Parkland shooting. And immediately, people rushed her at the end of her presentation to call her out. Say, you had me until you said that. You lost me there. And they were adamant. They feared that someone was going to take their guns. Not really all that concerned that actively the powers to be are attempting to take their union cards. And I said, I would love to see that kind of passion out of union members when someone talks about destroying workers' rights. I would love to see someone say, walk up to a politician and say, I know you voted for this. You've lost me. I'm voting against you no matter what. Because that's what it's going to take. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of Missouri, and obviously Ohio, the big race. What they're saying and what they're setting up as, this is going to be the bellwether. This is going to be the litmus test for what happens in November if the Democrat can win in the 12th district there. Then it's smooth sailing, and it's going to be and it by no means smooth sailing. As every person I've had on here who talks about the potential of a blue wave says, you got to vote and you got to run through the finish line, and you've got to every person has to get out. Because at the end of the day, the Russians are still playing their games. The Republicans have still gerrymandered heavily, and all of the voter suppression stuff and all of the voter theft stuff is still out there. So if they're able to steal 7 million votes like Obama said, we need to get 8 million. That's got to be the way it is. But it's going to be interesting to see how Kansas, Washington, Michigan, Conyers seat, John Conyers, who was in Congress, I think like 50-some years, 52 years. His seat is up. It'll be interesting to see who wins that, and also, of course, Missouri. One thing before we move on, I just flipped out today. Someone sent me an email with a story about the EPA allowing asbestos to be used again in manufacturing. And immediately I'm going, wait a second. I had heard that there was the potential possibility, maybe they were thinking about allowing some of these dangerous chemicals and these dangerous things to come back. Turns out that the EPA has enacted this significant new rule, which would, I guess, allow companies to use asbestos in their products. And they're saying it's on a case-by-case basis. And I'm going, I gotta tell you, I don't know anything that asbestos should be in. Right before we came out, my wife said that, they found asbestos in crayons. I'm going, really? They decided that was the best place to put asbestos that, has killed, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people over the years, maybe even millions of people for all I know. Because everybody knows someone who's died of asbestosis. Or if you've stayed up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you've watched late night TV, all of the people who are suffering from mesothelioma. I guess this could be a great thing for the lawyers, more people dying of lung disease and lung cancer and all of that because of it. Now, I checked it out over on Snopes because someone said, hey, you got to check Snopes. And I did. And they said, it's mostly true. There are a couple of things where the rhetoric that Pruitt was throwing out was, well, this is going to be a way for us to tighten up on how it's being used. Anybody believe that? Anybody believe that this administration, especially Scott Pruitt, is willing to do anything to tighten up on things that kill us? From what I've read, and the first story that broke on this was from Fast Company. They pointed out that this new rule would greenlight companies to use this toxic stuff without consideration of how it endangers us, and how it interacts with the atmosphere, with the water, with the land. Doesn't matter. Do whatever you want. Is this making us great again? Now, as someone pointed out, that there's a company in Russia that makes asbestos sheets, that evidently there is a picture of Donald Trump stamped on the side of the skids. Because, hey, he's making asbestos great again. Maybe that's what MAGA stands for, making asbestos great again. So tomorrow we're going to most certainly have that conversation. When we have the woman who yelled at Scott Pruitt in the restaurant on the program to share some of her thoughts. But I'm curious your thoughts. Asbestos good? Should we go back to it? We used it on a lot of pipes. I know it created a lot of jobs for people to rip out. And it created a lot of jobs for people in the healthcare industry to take care of those people who ripped that stuff out because they were dying. And of course, the funeral parlors and all the morticians, they did well. Is this disaster capitalism at its best? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Ashtyn Tayler is going to be here. She's a University of Texas pre-med student. She was one of the medical folks who were down in McAllen, Texas, looking at these kids who evidently we just decided we were going to steal from their parents and warehouse. We're going to get her story on what she saw and, well, how terrible the conditions were. I tell you, I'm not looking forward to this, just so you know. Going to take a quick break. Right back with Ashtyn. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. That was the day President Jimmy Carter declared a federal health emergency at Love Canal in the city of Niagara Falls, New York. Premier spokeswoman, housewife Lois Gibbs, became the poster child for the citizens' environmental justice movement virtually overnight. Niagara Falls Gazette journalists had broken the story 2 years earlier. Residential sump pump testings and health surveys found a number of toxic chemicals and unusually high rates of cancers, birth defects, miscarriages, and other serious health concerns. Initially planned as a canal, the site remained abandoned until the 1940s. That's when Hooker Electrochemical Plant and the city began using the site to dispose of toxic chemicals and municipal waste. More than 20,000 tons of toxic sludge containing more than 21,000 chemicals were buried there. Then, in 1953, the city school board bought the site and built 2 schools on the property. Soon, about 1,000 families settled nearby. By the early 1970s, residents complained of foul odors, health issues, substances filling their basements, and leaky waste disposal drums popping up in their backyards, killing all plant life. Carter's initial declaration provided limited funding, but the disaster led to the passage of the Superfund Act. The neighborhood was demolished, and residents were compensated and relocated. The new owner of Hooker Chemical, Occidental Petroleum, settled with the EPA for $129 million. Despite 21 years of remediation and residential redevelopment, new residents complained in 2011 of foul odors and ruptured sewer lines oozing toxic sludge. By 2014, 1,000 new complaints had been filed, contending the area had never been properly remediated. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, I look at probably what is going to be one of those moments in 30, 40 years that our grandchildren look back and go, what in the hell were you thinking about? Where were you? What did you do? What did you do to stop the atrocities? What did you do to stop an authoritarian regime from ripping children from their parents and throwing them in the cages? What did you do? Kind of one of those dark stains on our history, like we look back to the Japanese internments. Only I think this is even more cruel because you're ripping the families apart, and reports that I'm seeing, a lot of these kids may never get back with their parents. That's one of the things that just, as a parent, I don't even know how you begin to deal with. And I don't know how you deal with seeing firsthand the kind of atrocities. These children who are malnourished, these children who are dehydrated, these children who are dirty and unbathed and terrified. I don't know how you deal with that, which is why I've asked my next guest, Ashtyn Tayler, to come talk with us. She's a University of Texas pre-med student, also a medical volunteer in McAllen, Texas. Ashtyn, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi there. How are you, Rick?
I'm good, but I got to tell you, these are those moments where I hate doing this program because this is really horrible stuff.
Naturally, and it's like bio coming back up when I have to, talk about it again. But I do think this is a necessary evil, both to bear witness and to tell the American public what is going on and the atrocities that are occurring and continue to occur right now in our country.
I look at this and the hope is that the mass of us we can plead ignorant. We don't know. And when we find out and when we hear, we then become outraged. My fear is that we become so desensitized that, well, they're not our kids, so what?
Right. And then that's the issue with it, is that they're not our kids, they're not our citizens, but these are children, these are babies, these are mothers and fathers, and these are people whom I've personally spoken to. And when it makes a difference. There's a cognitive dissonance, when you say us versus them, but when you really get down on the ground level at ground zero and you look at a sick child and a mother who wants to give care to her sick child, but she hasn't been able to because she's been locked in essentially a cage for weeks on end, there are no more boundaries. And we're past the idea of political boundaries. This is past partisan politics. I mean, whether you're for open borders, closed borders, what have you, this isn't even an issue of politics anymore. This is an issue of humanity. Yeah, and I think it touches to us at our basest instinct of humanity.
Well, I hope so anyway. But here's the thing that gets me, and you can help me here, because as I'm being told, a lot of the folks that are put into these cages and are locked up tried to come here, quote unquote, the right way.
Oh, yes.
And this is where, this is where it all breaks down for me, because everyone said they ran across the border. No, they tried to come here the right way, and this is how they were treated. So what message does that say for anyone else who wants to try and come here the right way?
Right, and then the word that I would use is deterrent, and the word that I've used, ICE and CBP officials that I've heard them use is deterrent. And these are scare tactics. These are real physical torture tactics employed by our military, by other militaries in some cases, to deter people from coming over and fleeing and seeking asylum even the legal way. Because first of all, if anybody who's listening isn't informed, seeking asylum is not a crime, and it is not a crime to cross another country, to cross over into our country to seek asylum. So that's not illegal to do. And so when they're detained and they're treated like this, the message that it sends is the U.S. doesn't see you as humans, and we don't even see you as being entitled to basic human rights. And that's I think what should be so shocking and audacious to the American public is that we as a country have always had a philosophy of, we're America, we're the heroes, and we treat people with dignity and respect. We have this moral, this upright moral standing that has just crumbled into nothingness, and it's absolutely. It's outrageous. It's terrifying. And people who are seeking asylum and trying to do this the legal way, that this is the way that they're treated. And that I can't stress enough how absolutely audacious it is and how atrocious it is. And it's forever changed me. And I hope that anybody who's listening out there in the American public can put themselves in the shoes of a scared child or a scared parent and really think, what are we doing to a generation of children right now and a generation of parents? What are we doing ripping them away from their families? What are we doing keeping them in these conditions like this, keeping them sick, hungry, scared, afraid? Is this really America? Does this make America great?
I don't believe so, but back to your original point, we're the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I look at this not so much.
Right, exactly. And what while I'm not exactly a legal expert, I do know that it's not a crime to seek asylum in the United States. But besides that, I do know that it's our obligation and responsibility to render aid to these people. If anybody is sick, they have an illness or an ailment, while they're in U.S. custody, they're our responsibility to keep them, at least in the very least, adequately nourished, bathed, access to health care. And what I was told by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker and staff while I was down there in McAllen, we discovered this real time. There are no pediatricians in this detention facility in McAllen, Texas. It's called Ursula. No pediatricians for anywhere from 500 to 1,200 children at any given day. None.
That's just mind-blowing. But here's the thing. Look, when you dehumanize someone and you treat them as less than human, why would we be surprised by any of this?
Right. I mean, it shouldn't be shocking. I think that we're getting, this sort of disaster desensitization, this outrage desensitization, because we're seeing so many things, in the media about, it's one disaster after another, and it's one nightmare after another that it's been sustained and we can't wake up out of. But the reality is, and what I would kind of like to point everybody to, because I did a little bit of research, although the U.S. doesn't seem to be in great standing with the United Nations right now. At one point we were, and I would, like to take the time to say that this at least in part, meets the United Nations definition of genocide. We are deliberately inflicting on a group of people conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction in whole or in part. And that is one of the criteria that meets the United Nations definition for genocide. And we as a nation, I know that it's etched into our memories forever, and it came about in a time before I was born, but I've learned the history of it. We learned about things. We learned about the Holocaust. We've learned about Japanese internment camps. And we promised ourselves as a nation never again, and it's happening right now.
No, you're absolutely right. And, the thing is, most of us don't see the faces of these children. And I can't imagine, looking into the eyes of a hungry child, a sick child, and knowing that, there's almost nothing that you can do to help them.
Right. And it takes every bit of strength to be strong. I mean, you have to turn into a stone wall, and you have to do your job, and you have to render aid as best you can, because you can't break down, because these people are they're so battered, they're so broken down, and yet they still have the optimism to cling to life and to cling to hope. And that is the most, it brings about a sense of shame as an American, as somebody who was raised a patriotic American. It brings such a sense of shame to look into the eyes of a sick child and to have a mother tell me, in Spanish, we're kind of broken, halfway translating, a mother who is in her early 20s, she could be my age, she could be my cousin or my sister, and she fled organized crime syndicates because gangs had killed the rest of her family members, and she takes her young daughter and flees thousands of miles to a country where she's uncertain, she doesn't speak the language, but she's got family here and she wants a better life. She wants to go to university, and she's crying next to me because she says she's a bad mother because her child is sick, her daughter is sick, and she's sick because she's been detained in essentially a cage, a chain-link fence in a cold concrete cell for 14 days. I mean, it guts you, and it should gut you. It should gut the American public to hear these things and to imagine that that's them or that's somebody they love.
Really just heartbreaking. I mean, I keep coming back to that, and it's hard to believe that this is who we are, and it's us. I mean, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, this is who the world, this is what the world sees, and this is what the world sees of us.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. It's an embarrassment. It's a travesty. I mean, it's a human rights nightmare. I would absolutely agree to that. And these are generational scars. This is trauma that doesn't go away with an ACLU lawsuit. That doesn't go away with compensation or open borders or even immediate medical care, because the damage here has been done. The damage has been inflicted. That fear, when you threaten the fear of losing your child or losing your parent, or you've been separated and you've been sick and you've been treated as less than human, these are scars that last for a lifetime if they're untreated, and God knows they probably won't be. These are things that the effects of which we haven't seen and we aren't capable of knowing until decades later what effect that this is going to have on these children and these families.
One of the maggots in the chat room said, "This is what happens when you break the law."
Well,
thoughts?
Be an interesting rhetoric. I would hope, I would hope if I had gotten in trouble for any kind of unintentional trespass, I wouldn't be thrown in a dog pound jail and kept from, my life-saving medication. I would hope that nobody would, forget about me and tear me apart from my family and deny me legal representation. But again, I would like to reiterate that it is not a crime to seek asylum in the United States, and many, if not most of these people that I've encountered, if not all of these people that I encountered, had done so the legal way. They turned themselves in. They said, we're here to seek asylum. We'd like to go the legal route. And this is what they were given. They were going by the laws to the best of their ability. They were advocating for themselves and their families. They're fleeing domestic violence and organized crime syndicates from destabilized developing nations. And they were doing so as best they could, abiding by U.S. law. So I would say that that's completely a spurious claim, and it really demonstrates the level of heartlessness that you have to have for saying, not only something that's incorrect, but on top of incorrect, just a complete dearth of empathy and humanity.
Well, there's part of me that thinks it's the only way that they can look themselves in the face in any type of conscience. Saying, either dehumanize, they're not real people, or they're
Right.
illegals. There's got to be a qualifier, because I still have some faith in humanity. I know I probably shouldn't, but I still have a little bit of faith that, not everyone is, a stone cold hearted killer and someone who wants to see genocide and this kind of stuff.
Right.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I still want to hold on to that glimpse, that slim glimpse of hope that there's some good in everybody.
I want to think the same. I really do. In addition to, the atrocities that I've seen, I've also seen this tenuous and fragile and achingly beautiful optimism, not only from the immigrants who have persisted through these trials, but through American people that have just come down and said, I want to help in any way possible. I've had my social media inboxes flooded. I've had my phone ringing off the hook. It's people. There are good American people that either they don't know what's going on and they want to know what's going on, or they have some idea what's going on and they're outraged and they want to help. And I think that's the America that we have, and we have to dismantle this sense of otherness. We have to dismantle these boundaries of this otherness, whether it's, this other person is an immigrant, or, this other person is a maggot, which, truly somebody might ascribe to those hateful politics, and it shouldn't be tolerated. But we need to dismantle this sense of other and forsake that, I think, for a greater label, which is human. We're human, we're people, and nobody deserves this kind of treatment. Absolutely not. Let
me ask you, because you obviously were in this detention center. You've seen firsthand the conditions. I've had a lot of people tell me, well, it's overblown. You're being hyperbolic that they're in dog crates. It's they're getting attention because you as a pre-med student, you looked into their eye and all that. How bad is it?
Well, I'd like to go ahead and qualify by saying that I was detained trying to gain entry into the ICE detention facilities. So I literally, they were not keen at all on me asking questions, on me probing, on me finding out what's going on in there. It took a U.S. senator to gain entry and to tell us directly the conditions that he's seeing and get pictures of what's going on in there. So I have seen those, and I have spoken directly with immigrants who have all attested to the same exact conditions. And no hundreds of people who don't speak English are going to come to me separately and say, independently of the photographs that were taken and independently of the things that I've witnessed, and clarify and qualify each one of those things and do so completely flawlessly without it being actual fact. I can tell you for a fact, it is as bad as you think. There are chain link fences, the floors are concrete, the walls are concrete, the ceilings are concrete, the temperatures are cold enough to sustain any number of viral bacterial infections, upper respiratory infections, I wish there was some way, because obviously they don't even allow cameras in there unless you are, the president or one step below that. But the sentiment I would like to leave any listeners with is, it is as bad as you think and worse, because nobody risks their lives and crosses thousands of miles and then goes into these places and then later comes out sick from that. I mean, that alone should tell you. I mean, I'm seeing kids and adults come out infested with head and body lice, open sores consistent with chickenpox or varicella, any other number of contagious diseases, flu, spread like wildfire. Every single person that I had seen was probably some degree of feverish. Every last person that I saw walk through those doors they were run down, they were achy, they were coughing, they had fevers, and this isn't just, sniffles from traveling. This is, I have been confined in conditions where I was not allowed to sleep. The lights, the floodlights are on 24/7. You can't sleep. You're either on the floor, or if you're very lucky, you get a very thin little mat to sleep on and maybe a space blanket, and that's if you're lucky. But oftentimes, picture yourself having to dry off in the clothes that you cross jungles and rivers and cities with, and maybe it's about 50 to 60 degrees in this facility, 60 if you're lucky, but probably colder than that. Picture you're freezing cold, you're hungry, you get one bottle of water a day, and apparently 2 small meals, which vary from anywhere from like a sandwich to a tortilla with some ham to a bag of Lay's chips. And that's what you get for your nourishment. That's what your children get for their nourishment. And if you have anything wrong with you, you are quarantined. You're put in something called a hielero, which is Spanish for cold room or cold box. And these cold boxes are separate rooms within this detention facility that are quarantine areas, and they're incredibly cold. And this, I was told, was a practice put into place to kill the germs. And for anybody out there listening, it's not anywhere in my knowledge that we do that as any kind of medical protocol, as any sort of aseptic technique. This is literally not something that I've ever seen sanctioned by any physicians, putting people in these little cold boxes, these cold rooms, and giving them very little food and very little water. And I've had parent after parent tell me that they begged these ICE detention facility officials, please help my child. My child is sick. My child is throwing up. My child has a fever. My child has the flu. And they were given nothing. They were given no medical attention. They were given no assessment. They were given no medication, nothing. So essentially, they've been locked in a jail. They have no advocacy. They don't speak the language. In most cases, they're separated, and they can't see their children. They don't know what's happening to their kids. And they're
being tortured.
And they're being tortured. I mean, and this is torture. What I would also like to bring up, because this did come out in my notes, as I was writing everything down furiously, several parents told me that the kids and adults weren't allowed to sleep. So these floodlights are on, and these ICE detention officials are coming by, and they're kicking the children at the shoulders and the feet to keep them awake. And I was told that they're more compliant when they don't sleep. I was told that they don't fight as much when they don't sleep, when they're tired, they're exhausted, they can't fight back, they can't be fussy if they're, absolutely just exhausted.
What kind of a sick human being does that?
It's sick. How could you advocate for that? But especially to children.
Yeah.
Young,
and we also hear the stories of, as you're pointing out, physical abuse and sexual abuse and all of these horror stories that happen when you have this kind of power dynamic. It's disgraceful. But do you see it ending anytime soon?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. I think it's going to take outrage. It's going to take a massive outrage. It's going to take a boycott of the companies that fund these ICE detention facilities. It's going to take, hitting our representatives where it hurts. Hit them in the wallet. Hit them in the ballot box. I mean, this may be the cynic in me. They won't listen until they are forced to listen. Obviously, I think that there are many higher up people that know what is going on, and they know that this has been happening for a long time. Perhaps they planned for this to happen. Perhaps family separation. I'm starting to wonder if these sustained illnesses and just forsaking their health completely wasn't a side effect, but really an end game. So I think it's going to take a massive jerk in the correct direction. It's going to take a massive outrage on a massive scale. We as a nation need to know what is going on. We need to reform ourselves, arm ourselves with knowledge, then take that knowledge and do something with it to make a productive and sustainable change. And that starts with voting. That starts with finding out whoever advocated for this, whoever signed this into law, and voting every last one of them out.
Throw the bums out. That's the best way to start, and then hold them accountable. And my other part of this is I would like to see them all rounded up. Let's round all of them up and put them into dog crates in 50-degree temperature and give them a space blanket and see how long they last.
That's the level we're at right now. That's the level of outrage, is that you want them to understand that the psychological and the physical damage to one's health that is happening here. And I mean, if you don't have your family and your health, what do you have? But they need to be held accountable. It calls to mind the Flores trial, which was about, I think, something along the same lines about the treatment of detained immigrants. So we need another Flores case, and perhaps more drastic than that. We need a Hague. We need a Nuremberg for the things that have been done to these people and these children.
I'm with you. We need to start locking people up. Ashtyn, I appreciate your thoughts. Good on you for the work that you do. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for continuing to share, because the more you get out there, the more you wake people up. Hopefully, the more we do vote the bums out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Ashtyn Tayler, I literally don't. I'm almost speechless. Horrible. Just horrible. Quick break. Right back.
We chase the best house from the basement.
most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show. The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So let's find out what's going on around the world. I've got Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent with Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome. Glad to be with you again.
So China. Evidently, they've successfully tested a hypersonic aircraft. What's a hypersonic aircraft?
One that goes above the speed of sound many times over. This one apparently going 4,500 miles an hour. It's going to leave Earth's sort of atmosphere and go several 100,000 feet up and then have a very low re-entry angle. I don't want to get too technical here because it's not just because I don't have all the details in front of me, but everything I try to paper over and make it seem like I know would be a lie. I really don't understand this technology all that well. But it does seem to be that this is a weakness in American air defenses, American anti-missile systems, which are already quite imperfect. And it's a little, type of technology China's been trying to exploit for a long time. Research had been developing for a long time, hadn't gone anywhere. This is apparently a pretty big breakthrough. The RAND Corporation, other defense think tanks have written a lot about hypersonic weapons in the past. They're concerned that basically if there is going to be some sort of attack using these weapons in the future, it will throw out of whack the U.S. sort of emergency decision-making structure, because we typically operate with NORAD and all that stuff on the assumption that even in one of those like catastrophic multiple missile launch scenarios, things are flying across the polar ice cap and we can track them, right? And we kind of know where they're going and we can make decisions before they hit their targets in the U.S. This would be different. They wouldn't really be able to be detected by incoming radar before they hit their target, and they don't even need missile payloads, warheads, because there's so much kinetic energy on them. They cause enough damage it could kill a president or something like that. And so it's an asymmetric type of warfare in the current landscape. China appears to have a little bit of a leg up, but let's be honest. The U.S. military is also working on these things. It is probably one of those areas of technology where we're not quite so forthcoming about the status of our progress. I'm sure we are not so far behind as some media reports today have led on. And also Trump is creating a space force. So I'm sure we're on top of this, and it will just be used by folks on Capitol Hill to say we need to spend all that much more on defense so that we can catch up anytime China does something that we haven't done. So I don't know. I think the coverage here is a little bit overblown, but the technological implications, if we can actually hone this, it could have cool civilian implications too, because, we're trying to replace the Concorde and things like that. That's hypersonic aircraft too. So let's hopefully the trickle downs will be positive, not negative.
Yeah, so it won't take me 11 and a half hours to get to Alaska?
I don't know if that's probably not a height of density route to be prioritized, but they are talking about like New York to London in an hour and 20 minutes. I guess Boeing is working on something like this. I'd love it if we could get that back up and running, but probably not for you in Alaska.
I might actually get to Australia one day.
There you go.
But you killed all of my questions. First the Space Force that was going to be there because maybe Trump heard this in a room somewhere and hey, well we're gonna have a Space Force.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm a little dismayed by the tenor of the coverage today. There's like sometimes when a military development occurs and all of the outlets do a tremendous job putting claims into context, and I have been quite frustrated by CNN, Fox, even, some of our own reporting on this, which I just feel like it's kind of taking experts, like a very small group of experts at face value and making it seem like we have lost the race in this new domain of military. The Chinese military is growing rapidly. Their levels of spending increases put ours to shame, and that's saying something. And yet I still think we have a leg up in a lot of areas, and we should not. I think some of the fear-mongering about this technology is coming from defense industry people who hope to portray us falling woefully behind as a way of jacking up spending, and I'm not quite sure that's what this situation is.
No, I mean, that was the first thing I thought of, because look, China's, we're eventually going to get into that Cold War kind of, spending war. on the next technology and the next this or that. So this is that opening salvo of, hey, look, the Chinese, they're beating us. We've got to screw sugar in shoes and bread and butter and all that stuff. We need bullets or hypersonic planes in this case.
Yep.
So I perfectly understand it, but I can understand how people are going to go, no, we've got to forget the children. We need to defend ourselves. We need to feel safe, Luke. We need to feel safe.
I know. I just don't care about American safety. Is what it is. I'm just one of those coastal elites that doesn't. I can always flee to the enemy, right, instead of getting bombarded here.
Especially since you're right in probably the death zone if there ever were one of these attacks. But never mind the facts. Let's move on. We've reimposed sanctions. Midnight last night, was it? Reimposed sanctions on Iran?
Yeah, this is the first of two big waves of sanctions. The other ones are coming in November, which target oil exports, which will really hit that country's sort of export economy. These are pretty punishing too, though. I'm not even inclined to give the Trump administration the benefit of the doubt here to say, well, let's see what happens. I think we know what happens, which is that the middle class is going to suffer in Iran. The rich will be able to get richer because there will be all these black market industries, which become insanely profitable for people with outside connections. Importing medicine into Iran, hospitals won't be able to do that through legal channels, so smugglers will become more profitable. All sorts of, commodities, foodstuffs, things like that will be smuggled in and out of the country, and people on the sort of sidelines of the formal, legitimate economy will be the profiteers of that. The poor will probably suffer insofar as there will be job losses, commodity prices will increase, there'll be inflation, and yet there is also a long history of subsidies in Iran, and so that they will partially be offset for those who are reliant on spending a huge portion of their money on food. The people who, though, I think we're ostensibly this Trump administration strategy of sort of gentle regime change in Iran is trying to target, which is the middle class sort of people out in the street who don't want to be ruled by the Ayatollah anymore. They're the ones who are hit the most. And so I just see this as self-defeating. I mean, these are people who have loans, mortgages. They want to import things from other countries and export them. They're running various businesses. They're now blocked from dealing with international financial institutions. So they won't be able to hire. They won't be able to expand their homes or take out those loans. That, I don't think, engenders much goodwill towards the United States. These are people who are going to be really hurt because they have money invested. And we're already seeing, I think it's something along the lines of 70% decrease in the value of the Iranian currency in recent months. That's going to continue. So it's those people in the middle who are probably the most pro-American within Iran, who have the sort of a unique amount of political leverage they could put in the government, who I think get hurt the most here. Now, in the Trump thinking, perhaps it's good that those people feel a change in their state, because then they will, blame their government for the current situation. But blaming them for the current situation, why is it their fault that Trump has decided to reimpose sanctions after violating the Iran deal himself? And so I just think there's logical inconsistencies in this strategy. And again, I'm hesitant to say we should do this wait and see approach with this. There's just going to be oil sanctions imposed in November, but they're going to be weaker ones than we had before. Between 2009 and 2015, Obama was able to successfully get China and Russia and a whole bunch of other European countries to do the oil sanctions. And he successfully got China to basically, really dramatically reduce their imports of Iranian oil. Trump, it doesn't even have an aspiration to be able to convince those countries to do that here. So what kind of leverage are we clawing back? We're not going to get anywhere close to what we had before, and I am very pessimistic about the political impacts this is going to have in Iran. I just don't see our long-term aims, whatever they are, truly being advanced by this.
Yeah.
But the Trump administration wants us to say wait and see, so I suppose we have to.
Well, we're going to wait and see one way or another, but I don't think they have a long-term goal whatsoever, other than John Bolton wanting to bomb Iran. That's the long-term goal in my view. But my problem with this is, as you pointed out, China and Russia were on board before, not now. So this is where China, I think, steps in and, they start filling the void where other countries were we're doing business, and you got to wonder, our allies who have opened up ties and have opened up businesses and have opened up lines of commerce with Iran, what are they going to do? Are they going to they're going to come along with us begrudgingly at the beginning, but eventually peel off? I don't know. This just seems like a really bad idea at this moment.
Yeah, and I haven't really formulated this thought, but I can sort of see it sort of fitting together, which is that, Iran is one of those countries where it's not the best country in the world in terms of good governance, far from it. There are a lot of problems there, but it's also far from the worst, and yet we paint them as that. And my concern is that when the U.S. just looks for reasons to spoil legitimate dealings with these sort of countries in the middle, the peripheral, good guys and peripheral bad guys, and it looks for reasons to squash those relationships. It's China's offer of, hey, we just want to do business and not ask any questions becomes so much more enticing. And we really need, the U.S. is pretty good at maintaining good business ties with allies who have got most of their stuff figured out. But we also want to be, we are specifically, and you listen to Pompeo, he goes to Asia last week, because our Indo-Pacific strategy is all about offering better terms of outside financing to all these countries that are under China's sway right now from their big infrastructure push. And you've got to find a way to allow normal economic relations, or at least something approaching them, a respectful economic engagement, to occur with countries that don't have perfect records either. Because when you do that, you can hopefully bring those countries into America's orbit and share our, quote unquote, good governance and other things with them. But finding reasons to torpedo things with Iran just seems to me to be quite counterproductive. And you're right. I think it gives China's way of doing business a little bit more appeal by contrast.
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't export our good governance right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I heard what that kind of standing do we have? I saw the air quotes many times over as I said it, but you still want to believe there's something there. And I do think beneath all of the chaos of the Trump administration, there are still a lot of benefits that come by Americans and American business people going around the world and meeting and interacting with other people, even if some of the messages we send from the leadership are far from what we would ideally be exporting around the world.
Let's hit some good news. Evidently, as a globe, we have hit a terawatt of renewable energy generation. How big is a terawatt?
A terawatt is about what the U.S. generates in total electrical capacity altogether. So that's a lot. And so we've added basically in America's worth of electricity generation to the world, and it's all in the form of renewables. It took 40 years and $2.3 trillion, if my numbers are correct, to get there to the first terawatt. Experts that I talked to from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is the group that declared us as having crossed this threshold, say we'll be able to put the next terawatt together for half of that cost and within the next 5 years. So boy, is this exponential growth. And it's shifting a little bit further and further toward solar, just because prices are coming down so quickly. It used to be kind of wind that got us the first part of the way. Now solar's taking off. And I even caught some glimpses of limited, isolated praise for the Trump administration's strategy on renewables, not because they've been consistent messengers on climate change, far from it. Not because Trump has imposed, tariffs on imported Chinese photovoltaic panels, which is quite counterproductive if you want to increase uptake of some of that, but that they have basically had to admit that the economics make so much sense for offshore wind that they've opened up a whole bunch of leases to create more offshore wind farms. But that shows you these technologies are not winning it because they're, like someone's pet project and they want to have a little sweetheart pork or something like that. These solar and wind, according to these experts, within 5 to 10 years are going to be basically as competitive with fossil fuel generation costs globally when you look at any individual product. So that's a great trend, and it's exciting that we'll be doubling this renewable production within 5 years, if all holds true.
Now, as a globe, we'll be doing that. We still won't be. I think we're still in the drill baby drill stage.
I think we're at 100 gigawatts. So 1/10 of that total global total is coming from the United States, and that's the big milestone we're going to be marking, I think, in the next few months, if we're not already there. But yeah, no, again, I think things are heading in the right direction here, and I was surprised to hear even limited sort of praise towards the Trump administration. It seems like you can't, if the Trump administration had been in place during the Obama years, and the economics of renewables weren't quite so solidified, they could have found reasons to just completely stonewall investment in them. But at this point, the hourly costs and, generation costs are low enough that it's hard to ignore the economic and environmental wisdom of some of those projects.
Yeah, well, we in the Smith household, we do our very small part. We've got solar panels, generate about half of our electricity through the panels. We've had them on since 2012. I've been, thanks to the Republicans here in Pennsylvania, it's going to take me, twice as long to pay it off as originally mapped out. But hey, I'm still happy we did it.
There you go.
If only we could oust all of those Republicans from the House and the Senate and replace them with people who will fix the energy portfolio and bring up the SREC credits so that it pays off quicker. I think that would be very, very helpful, at least for me. Anyway.
There you go.
So there you go. And finally, new research from Yale on climate change communications. What are we finding out? What are we knowing?
This is interesting. So they've been interviewing thousands of people around the country for the last decade, trying to find out if global warming is happening, and they're not trying to figure that out. They're asking people what they think. Turns out we've got really high numbers now, or the highest yet. 70% of Americans, obviously could be higher, but think global warming is happening. The highest state, it appears, is D.C. at 82%, 77% for New York, about the same in California, a little lower in Massachusetts. The lowest in the country at 59% believing global warming. That's still pretty high, though, when you think about it, is West Virginia at 59, then the low 60s for the Dakotas, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi. That's a good sign, I think, that people are on board with global warming happening broadly. What I'm very worried about, 36% of people say they discuss global warming at least occasionally. That's pretty darn low. You'd think if it were something you really think is a problem, you'd be talking about people about trying to fix it. That appears to not be happening on a large scale. And more worrisome, though, why I put this story in the news is a way of trying to correct this. Only 22% of people say they hear about global warming in the news media at least once a week, especially with these wildfires, with global heat waves, with us losing the battle on capping emissions through the Paris Agreement. We should be hearing about these stories much more in the media, and it makes me realize that I'm living in something of a bubble where the New York Times and The Economist are hitting me with these messages all the time, but that's not what the Fox News cohort is getting. And finally, my closing bit of, concern here, which is always how I love to end a news segment, is what I've called the American sort of invincibility complex appears to be alive and well, which is that 70% of people say global warming is going to hurt plants and animals around the world. It already is. They're definitely right about that. Yep. Then it goes down. 62% of people think global warming is going to hurt people in the developing world, somewhere else. 4% less. At 58% say it's going to hurt people in the United States. And then 41% say it's going to harm me personally. We have this narrative that somehow this is just a problem for another time, for somewhere else, that some other weaker person than I is going to be hurt by. And we obviously know that's not true. The long arm of climate change is going to hit all of us. And that to me is further proof that this sort of American exceptionalism narrative is causing people to think we can somehow, or they can, through sheer will and brain power and brawn, can escape climate change, which is obviously not true. So we've got a lot of work to do, but talking about climate change, global warming on your show hopefully gets these numbers changed and gets awareness up.
I hope so. Because most of the time when you have discussions about climate change, it's one of two discussions. One, it's really, really hot and oh my goodness, climate change is happening. Or it's really, really cold and someone goes, hey, where's your climate change now?
Yeah.
Those are the two conversations. We don't seem to have the rational middle of, yes, it's going to get much hotter, and yes, it's going to get much colder, and yes, the storms are going to get much bigger, and we're going to have much more cataclysmic events and more hurricanes and more, all kinds of stuff and huge refugee problems and all kinds of stuff that we can't even think of yet. But hey, as Drew Carey said when he was, spraying the aerosol can, screw the grandkids, I'm cold now.
Exactly. No, you're right. It's the Drudge Report mentality of covering the climate, which is when it's hot, they put that heat. It's like it's from the 1970s. They link on the Drudge homepage to some sort of heat map of the U.S., and it shows that Phoenix roasting at 120. And then they talk about the snow record totals, and they've got that old school snow. So they love to cover the extremes, but it's never about, the punishing reality of the day-to-day changes. That's clearly going to escape there. notice until it's far too late. So you're right. It's that sensational instincts are leading us, I think, to look at the wrong thing.
Or Senator Inhofe with his stupid snowball.
Oh, yeah.
So there's that. Luke, appreciate the time. Great stuff, as always.
You're welcome, Rick. Talk to you soon.
All right. Our good friend Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Donald Trump bragged in 2016 that, quote, I know words. I have the best words. Well, occasionally he does use some very fine words that convey great promise, as in this sentence. I'm going to fight for every person in this country who believes government should serve the people, not the donors and special interests. Trump also declared he would, quote, drain the swamp to rid Washington of those creepy, crawly special interest lobbyists. Excellent words. But they only matter if the speaker actually means them, backing their rhetorical promise with action. As we've seen, though, far from draining the swamp, Trump converted the White House itself into a fetid cesspool of lobbyists, corporate executives, and banksters. His transition team was almost exclusively made up of those swamp critters. His glitzy inaugural celebration was bankrolled by big oil, big coal, big pharma, and other bigs that attached their legislative and regulatory demands to the checks they donated. Most of his top officials come straight out of Wall Street and corporate suites, turning Trump's government into a sump pump that is routinely funneling billions of dollars in special regulatory favors to the moneyed elite. When asked why he put Wall Street hucksters in charge of economic policy, he offered this scramble of words that inadvertently revealed his true plutocratic soul. I love all people, rich or poor, but in these positions, I just don't want a poor person. This is Jim Hightower saying, really? Not even one official who understands poverty from firsthand experience and could not only give you advice, but also some understanding? And what about those hard-hit middle-class workers Trump always talks about? Nope. He hasn't appointed a single one to a top policy position. So forget Trump's words. If the poor and middle class aren't in his government, they're not in his heart either, nor in his policies.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
There's no one at home, it was cool. It was just all cool. Now it's over for me, and it's over for you. I believe the world is burning to the ground. Oh well, I guess we're gonna find out.
I'm looking at the returns in Ohio so far, and I'll be honest, I don't know that I can deal with another Green Party defeat. I just don't know. I don't know that I want to hear another couple of months of if the green wasn't there. I keep getting the people sending me the memes of, if Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein would have just stayed out of it, we wouldn't be in this mess. To which I always love to throw back, had Hillary not jumped in, we wouldn't be in this mess. Had Joe Biden run, we'd have Joe Biden as president. And I can't qualify that either. So shut up already. Just my thought. Anyway, let's talk about what's going on tonight. Proposition A seems to be going the right direction. The no vote, it looks like 2/3 of the vote going that way so far. So here to talk about what's going on in the other primary states, our good friend David Yankovich. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me. Long time.
Yeah, where you been? We missed you.
I've been all over the place, man. I've been in Ohio. I've been in Michigan. I've been traveling the country and trying to get some people going. So here I am with you tonight, as tradition.
So is it possible Ohio could come down to the 1% of green votes that went to the green guy? Is that possible?
Oh, yeah, but here's the thing. I know it sounds like political spin, but we just forced them to spend $5 million on a race that they're going to have to defend in 3 months.
Right.
You and I on this show, for how long I've been coming on now? 2 years. We always say we want the Democrats to throw punches and be in a fist fight, not hold our toes. If we're in a fist fight, man, this is a seat we haven't won in 30 years. Here we are, 0.4% right now, 741 votes down in a race they said we can't win again. So, I'm feeling great. I'd love to see.
This is a win. I'm not. Regardless of what happens, this is a win. This is a district that Trump won by 11 points. It was a seat that was, I guess, the last election for this seat was a 36-point difference. This is a win, regardless of if he actually wins. But I would have liked to have seen. I want to see him win.
Of course. I mean, me too. But the thing is 36 points from last year to this year, or 2 years ago to this year. That's a big swing. And we're doing this all over the country. If the Republicans aren't nervous and they're going to use this as like their narrative for the next 2 months that they won this one seat, they're in a lot of trouble because they're basically bragging that we just lost 40 points and skated by in a district that we should have blown everybody out of. Yep. I'm feeling great. Now, the Green Party stuff, I mean, it's happening again. Here's the thing. We needed 1,102 more people, Democrats, to show up and vote. So when everybody tells me that my vote doesn't matter in my district or whatever, that's, there can be 20 people in the race. If we don't have the votes, we don't have the votes. So I'm not going to blame it on anybody else. We need to come out and show up more. That's what this comes down to.
I agree with you.
But I still have hope.
Right. And to step back a second, so people know we're talking about the congressional special election in Ohio's 12th congressional district. Democrat Danny O'Connor, Republican Troy Balderson, who was on stage with Trump just this week. And if you saw the story coming out of Franklin County, which is the largest area there in that district, O'Connor got like 80% of the early votes to, I guess, 19% for Balderson, which again, to me, highlights the fact that another reason why Republicans want to destroy early voting.
Oh, of course. I mean, they want to destroy early voting. They want to gerrymander districts. They want to make it harder to vote. We saw in Michigan today, too, that a bunch of polling stations had their power lost. And there's not extended voting hours or anything like that. It's just, they want to make it as hard as possible. They don't want early voting. They don't want it to be more democratic. They're talking about the red wave. And whenever I hear the red wave, I always think of the Russian wave. That's what we're looking at. We have to beat them back. Yeah, and we're fighting.
Right, but that is the wave that they want. They want the Russian wave. Did you see the two idiots with the T-shirts? I'd rather be Russian than Democrats.
I know. I wish that my grandfather was still around so he could smack them both right upside the head.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the first things I thought. These are older guys. These aren't young kids trying to get a rise out of somebody. These are guys in their 60s and late 60s who are doing dumb stuff. They were old enough to remember the Soviet Union.
It doesn't surprise me, and it shouldn't surprise anybody. That's what we're looking at from their side. They have a really great information structure of propaganda and memes and digital and, radio and everything else, pumping this stuff out 24/7. History is going to show that they're on the wrong side, and it's going to show they're on the wrong side pretty soon here.
No, you're right. No, but here's the thing. You brought up digital. You brought up, what they're pumping out. And, I don't think most people know that Trump is like the master of this. He's been pumping out stuff at just really an incredible rate. I think it was something like, 55,000 digital ads he ran?
Just during the month of June. Yeah. It's, the thing is 2018, they're testing out what's going to work for, of course, the midterms here, but they're also testing out what's going to work in 2020. We're seeing a lot more memes come out. We're seeing a lot more Russian bots and those types of accounts. And the biggest argument that I have with Democrats isn't over fiscal policy or social policy. It's the fact that I think Donald Trump is a very smart person on social media, and everybody gets mad at me. We're getting killed by him. He's dominated every news cycle since he decided to come down the escalator. He's dominated us, and he continues to. And the things that come out of his mouth right now, all these horrible things and policies, this is to stir his base. And he knows he's in trouble with the Russia investigation. He knows he's in trouble with, all the stuff that's with the Manafort trial and everything that's happened. So he's stoking his base. And he's a genius at this. And the Democrats have to figure this out sooner rather than later, because we only have, less than 90 days now, or around 90 days until the midterms. And then we have, 2020 coming, which is probably the most consequential election in the history of this country. And it has to be digital. It's going to be fought mostly on digital. We're going to need to be out in the field and canvassing and doing all that. But if we don't take, basically the digital door knocking, the digital canvassing, the, memes and the gifts and everything straight to the Republicans the way they are us, we will lose in 2020.
Yeah,
they're playing fire up.
They're playing a whole nother game. We're still putting up billboards and putting yard signs in our yard. They're hammering us in every other mode of information.
Yeah, I will say this though. and everybody argues with me on this too. I think the yard signs are a pretty good barometer sometimes. When we were down in Alabama, having the right side of history in every single yard when you're going down made us feel pretty good. And there was a huge demand for it. People wanted to show this, but that was the effective branding of the campaign. This race is about more than Republican versus Democrat. That's how we have to run. This race is about history. It's about the right side and the wrong side. And, the buy-in from these candidates to get their message across of what they stand for is so critically important, because that's when lawn signs actually matter. That's when, the phone banking and all that stuff does, because it's your brand. It's who you are. And that's another part of the digital component of this too. But we have a lot of work to do. I mean, right now, we're maybe 10% there compared to the Republicans, 90%. They spent the last 6 years preparing for this, and we haven't.
No, I talked to a guy last night who was a fantastic guy. I mean, was literally in a head-on collision going to work with his petition signed in the van with him, and broken 40+ bones broken, gurgling blood on the side of the road, worried about his petitions. Got put into he got them signed in, put an X as his signature, because that's the best he could do to get on the ballot. Doesn't have a Twitter account.
Yeah, you're not going to get very far anymore without Twitter or Facebook, and even Instagram, which I'm usually rolling my eyes at, is coming up pretty quickly. Yeah, you have to take digital seriously, and I mean, it's going to be at our cost if we don't. But the good news is that the party is starting to take it seriously. They are starting to invest a lot more into it. And one thing that I didn't consider when Donald Trump became president was the power of this resistance, and how many people out there were just going to be so pissed off that they didn't care what happened. They were going to march. They were going to go in the rain. They were going to show up. I mean, we're looking at 40-point races we have no business even competing in, and we're in the mix. I mean, Doug Jones in Alabama, we won, of course. Conor Lamb, we won. But there's a lot of races that, we're 35, 40-point underdogs, and we're losing by 1-2% in this stuff. So, I mean, I'm feeling really good. And if this is the barometer for the midterms, I'm excited.
Well, I mean, this O'Connor race tonight. I mean, this is right in line with what you're talking about. This was a 36-point election the last time they ran this, and they're talking not even a percent. We're talking fractions of a percent.
Yep. And I mean, that's it. And we continue doing this. But the biggest thing is, and you and I continuously talked about it, is show up in every single race, and every single district, every single county, your state legislator, your state senate, all the way up to, senator and Congress. If we show up every single time, they can't compete with us. They don't have the numbers. In the last election, only 24% of this country actually voted. I mean, if all of us show up, and if we come in, we'll pave the road with all of them. And that's how we win these things. Everybody has to show up. Everybody has to put the work in, and we need to pay attention to all the races. And one big thing I want to say, and I know we don't have too much time, but, there's we're looking at all these governor races this year. We're 3 governors races away from having a constitutional convention by the Republicans, where they can change the entire fabric of the country. So, I mean, those races are also critically important. So it's not just the House, and it's not just the Senate or the presidency. Your governor's races are hugely important, and we need to work on those as well.
Well, no more important than right here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the race in the country.
I would agree. I mean, there's that one. Then you have the race right next to it in Ohio with Ford Brae. I mean, and as the Midwest goes, the country is going to go. But yeah, I mean, that's the race. I mean, those two, I think, were probably the 2 biggest bellwethers of what's going to happen too. And I'm feeling pretty good about it. I really am. I think
I am too. But I'm a little concerned because Ohio's a little different animal. I mean, if Tom Wolf loses in November, Pennsylvania becomes a right to work state immediately. And me, that's my main focus. And then with it come all of the rest of the no rights at work agenda, and then all of the tax giveaways, and then all of the deregulation, and then all of the horrible that comes along with Republican leaders slashing education, slashing social safety programs, all of that stuff by the wayside. At least in Ohio, you can do the initiative. You can do referendums like they did in 2011 over what was it? Number 2. It was issue 2, the one where they pushed back on right to work. They're able to at least do that here in Pennsylvania. Not.
I mean, both of those races are going to tell us a lot. I mean, I think that Pennsylvania is hugely critical. Plus, it's a Democrat that we need to keep in office. It's a guy who, is a business owner who got there. He's not a career politician. I like Tom Wolf a lot. I think that, he has what it takes to be a good governor or continue to be a good governor, just because, I mean, he cares. So, but I mean, again, it's investing in digital, and there's no better place as the head of your state to speak from that platform. You're going to have a whole different audience than you would when you're just posting press releases out and doing that. There's so much work we got to do, and we got to get there. And as it stands right now, we're not there yet. But like I said, we're making huge progress, and thank God that there are so many people out there who are calling this a blue wave, or they're in resistance, or they're just advocating and showing up, because honestly, the party hasn't gotten to the point where they can sustain on their own. This is all people power, all of it. Like, we're not seeing, I mean, I won't give the Democratic Party really any credit for any of the wins or any of the trajectory we had this year. I will give it to the people of this country who are just pissed off enough to stand up and say, I'm not taking this anymore.
But this is what we've been talking about and I've been talking about for years, is people taking back their parties. I want Republicans to take their party back somewhere to the sane line. So that maybe we don't have all of this wide swing of ideological nonsense. I mean, I look at Trump, and even some of the more rational Republicans that I know aren't thrilled with the policies that he's pursuing. The massive debt that they're taking on, the massive deficit, $1 trillion deficit they're going to run this year. I mean, if you're a conservative, you're a true conservative, you cannot be happy with what this administration is doing on any level whatsoever.
Well, I mean, you got to know too that most of these conservatives aren't real conservatives. They're masquerading as conservatives, and really they're racist or sexist. It's telling though, because there are people out there who are true conservatives who can't stomach what Trump is doing. I talked to a guy a couple days ago that he's a hardcore Trump supporter, and he has been. He doesn't even care that there's all the immigration stuff and the walls. He wants to throw everybody out. But he said that the thing that he can't stomach is that the kids of mass shootings are being attacked. And that was like the line in the sand for him. Not even the economic stuff. It was just, he kind of had his like, who have we become moment with that. And I mean, the policies, the worst of them that Trump and the Republicans have passed don't take effect until after the midterms for a reason. And we have, like I said a million times, we have a ton of work to do with this. But the Republican base is slowly kind of turning away. And the Russia thing is a huge part of this. And Trump keeps pushing himself into a corner on it. You had the Manafort trial, you had the Flynn that flipped. I mean, there's so much happening. But, I mean, he's kind of twisting himself into a pretzel. So, it's a nightmare. But, I mean, on his side of it, he's in trouble. Like, we're going to win in 2020. I mean, I can predict that right now. It's just going to come down to, are we going to take everything else back with it?
Yeah.
Trump,
or if it's going to be Trump.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I was just saying, I don't even know if Trump will be the nominee in 2020 at this point.
Or if he'll even be free.
Or if we can be free. Yeah, we might be yelling, lock him up. Actually, Adam Parker Meno in his protest, they yell, lock him up every day when he comes into the White House.
Have you seen them? They have done a fantastic job the last couple of weeks. I mean, yesterday you had Rosie and the Broadway singers out there. Every day it's been like a special, like an event that's just been fantastic. The problem is that Trump's obviously not there. It'd be great to see that happen in New Jersey.
Well, there was a video that they had of them chanting "lock him up" as Trump and Melania got out of the limo. So I mean, you could actually hear it happening. But
nice.
I gotta say, like, Adam is one of my best friends in the world, and I'm really upset with him because I wish I would have thought of this idea before he did. Because it's perfect, and it's perfect for the moment we're in. It's perfect to give people something to fight for and to show up and do. And it's funny, and really, we're doing exactly the same to them that they did to us for so long.
Yeah, only I would argue a much higher road, because no matter how long I live, I still I will never forget 2004, watching all of the quote unquote patriots walking around with Purple Heart Band-Aids, mocking John Kerry's service to the country. That's one of those things I'll never forget.
Yeah, I mean that was where this all began. And honestly, we can politics has always been nasty, but I think that was like the first real low level, at least in modern times. But Sarah Palin, I think, is the reason why Republicans have become what they are. You have somebody who absolutely knows nothing and is really a joke, and somebody who should have no business being in politics or leadership in any capacity. But because she can smile on camera and kind of stir the base's anger up and do that and be charismatic about it, you know, people rallied behind her. And that kind of showed a new pathway for Republicans. You don't have to know anything. All you have to do is say the most ignorant, nasty thing possible to get news and continue to do it.
Yeah.
So I kind of see that as, you know, from that point on, that's kind of when everything changed a little bit.
Yeah, we went by where she lives. I didn't actually go to her house. We were next door. And I wanted to see if you could see Russia. We couldn't.
Oh yeah, you were just in Alaska. How was that?
It was fabulous. I mean, it was one of those trips where it was so perfect. I don't think I can ever go back.
Why can't you ever go? Did you go fishing?
No, because if I go back, it'll just screw it up. You'll never be able to top how great it was. So I just can't go back.
That might be the United States here in a few years. So let's.
Although, as my wife said, she's willing to try. But it was beautiful. It was, it was in the high 70s, low humidity, sun up at 5:30, sundown at 11 p.m. Full days of just, the most beautiful scenery that you've ever seen in your life. But to be honest, a little sad in watching the glaciers melt away, knowing that in a couple of years they'll be certain ones will be completely gone and never back again. And interesting that you're talking about an extraction state with the kind of beauty and destruction that's going on, and it's just this kind of weird situation.
Yeah, and the thing is too, and this is something I've been thinking about, is, Elon Musk recently was found to be one of the top donors to the Republican Party. This is a guy who is all about science. Like, his entire life, his entire business model, everything is about pushing the limits of science. What the hell is he doing given to the party of anti-science, like, of every limit of it? Like, they deny everything. I mean, the only thing I can think of is he doesn't want to pay unions.
I literally have no idea in that. Other than maybe like Trump did, you buy both sides because you're buying everybody. And this is the one honest thing that Trump actually did say, is that, the whole system is kind of corrupt and that it's the money. And to me, the answer is getting the money out of the game and moving in that direction. And, as you've pointed out, the Democratic move forward has been because of people power. I would rather have it be people power than money power. And I used to always say the billionaires have all the money, but we've outprocreated them. We should be able to win. Sadly, they've taken a segment of us and brainwashed them.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Yeah. But we have a ton of work, but whatever happens tonight, like right now, it's saying that we're down 0.8 percentage points or 1688 votes on the New York Times page. So I want everybody out there to dig a little bit deeper tomorrow, whether we win or whether we lose. Right now, it's 99% of the precincts reporting, but there's enough there. That's why they haven't called it yet. Dig deep, get out there, organize, register all your friends and family. And if we end up not winning this seat, it's going to be because of about 1,200 votes, which tells everybody out there that your vote matters.
Yep.
It matters in a huge way. Don't blame it on the Green Party. Don't blame it on Russia. Don't blame, get out there and vote. We'll handle the rest of it, but get out there and vote.
Good stuff. David, appreciate the time. Spot on.
Always appreciate it. Thank you so much, Rick.
As always, our good friend David Yankovich. Hey, look, at the end of it, he's right. You got to get the biggest march is the march to the polls in November. Vote the bums out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. For working people.
To the clock, but I don't really know. And I can't remember caring for an hour.
The winds kicked up, the temperatures kicked up, the humidities went down, and then we started getting really erratic fire behavior.
Northern California wildfire, now the largest in state history.
An unusual number of dead animals have been washing up on Florida's shores this summer.
Toxic algae blooms wreaking havoc in Florida.
It's a summer that's already seen a number of temperature records smashed across the northern hemisphere, and now
Europe's heat wave has made Sweden shorter.
Wait, what?
Plus,
a huge award today in the third lawsuit in our state focusing on hog waste.
North Carolina jury awards nearly $500 million in damages against hog farms.
All of that hog waste and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
They say that greedy trial attorneys are endangering the future of agriculture.
Yes, it's those greedy trial attorneys again who are endangering the future of agriculture. I knew it. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, no offense intended, but today's Green News Report stinks.
Yes.
On several levels.
Yes, indeed it does. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, in Northern California, President Donald Trump has issued an official disaster declaration for the state, freeing up federal funds to assist in the response and recovery from 17 large wildfires that have destroyed more than 1,000 homes and killed at least 8 people. The National Weather Service has confirmed that the Carr fire near Redding generated a rare fire tornado. That was the equivalent of an EF3 tornado, only made of fire. But the fast-moving Mendocino Complex fire is actually even worse. Over the weekend, it doubled in size to become the largest fire in state history, breaking the record set by the Thomas Fire just last year. The state has already spent about a third of its annual fire budget, and the height of the season is still yet to come. In a press conference, Democratic Governor Jerry Brown warned that California's fire season is projected to get worse and is an ominous sign of our global warming future.
We're in a new normal. Over a decade or so, we're going to have more fire, more destructive fire, more billions that'll have to be spent on it, more adaptation, more prevention. So all that is the new normal that we have to face.
Scientists are also mocking President Trump's bizarre tweets on California's wildfires as, quote, comedically ill-informed. In a weekend tweet, Trump didn't mention firefighters or any of the victims or their families, but instead inexplicably asserted that California's water is, quote, being diverted into the Pacific Ocean. Those are called rivers, Mr. President. Rivers are where California's billion-dollar salmon industry comes from. And fire officials say there is no shortage of water for firefighting.
It was a short tweet, but this is only a 6-minute episode of the Green News Report, so there is no way to adequately respond to the idiocy that he was able to pack into 280 characters in that ridiculous tweet.
And the ongoing extreme heat wave across Europe is forcing nuclear plants to ramp down because the water that they use for cooling the reactors, whether it be from rivers or the ocean, is actually now too warm to do the job. Spain, Portugal, and France are hovering at or near all-time high national heat records, and the European heat wave has literally made Sweden's tallest peak shorter. It's no longer the country's highest point because the melting glacier on top of it lost 13 feet in the month of July alone.
Wow.
But the heat is also on in Florida, where it's causing toxic algae blooms in both inland freshwaters and in the ocean. It's linked to both rising temperatures and fertilizer pollution. We previously reported on a toxic green algae bloom that's befouling freshwater areas like Lake Okeechobee. But in the Gulf of Mexico, an extended, unprecedented toxic red tide algae bloom has killed thousands of fish and manatees on the west coast of Florida and generated noxious fumes that have sent residents to the hospital with respiratory problems and affected 100 miles of shoreline.
See, that's what I mean. This Green News Report stinks.
But there is some good news regarding noxious fumes. In North Carolina, a federal jury has awarded nearly $500 million in damages to 6 neighbors of industrial hog farms contracted by the Smithfield Corporation. The jury agreed with homeowners that the stench from massive lagoons of manure generated by nearly 8,000 hogs every day created an intolerable, inescapable odor that attracted insects and reduced the value of their properties and their ability to live there. It's the third victory for homeowners challenging hog farms' waste management. Naturally, North Carolina's Republican majority state legislature has moved into action, passing laws to restrict the rights of homeowners to bring such lawsuits against hog farms in the future.
Some good news regarding noxious fumes, a phrase you're likely to only hear on the Green News Report. Thank you very much. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Ooh, that smell. Can't you smell that smell? Ooh, that smell. The smell of gas around you.
Volkswagen just invested in Tennessee in a right-to-work state at a low cost with less health care. Why should we prop others up when other companies can compete in this marketplace? It's time to let these people learn the lesson the hard way.
Suddenly I see. This is what I want to be.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, interesting night going on in Missouri. It looks like about 2/3 of the folks so far, with about 45% of the vote in, voting no on Proposition A, which would turn back the whole no rights at work agenda there. The moneyed interest not happy whatsoever. Understand, a no vote is the right vote in my view, repealing the right to work law and giving workers the ability to have I guess better wages, good health care, retirement security, some voice on the job, stuff like that. Things all that the Chamber of Commerce certainly not thrilled about. So I'm happy to see that. It reminds me of Ohio back 2011 when they pushed back on Kasich and the right to work there. Good stuff. And look, at the end of it, when people vote, when we get the say in this, they push back on it almost every time. Anyway, lots to get to. Lots to talk about. Post-Janus world, thanks to the Supreme Court, now they've imposed national right to work on all public sector workers, and our public transit workers are part of the public sector, and I often wonder how it's going to affect them, which is why I have asked Chris Townsend to come talk with us. Chris is the mobilization and he's the director of Field Mobilization with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU. Chris, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So good news coming out of Missouri so far, I think, right?
Well, it seems that way. Let's hope the trend continues. One is always careful to not call things too soon, but I tend to agree that it will pass because with most of these things, when we have a chance to go to the membership, go to the regular people, retirees, they see it our way as workers themselves. And notwithstanding the right-wing money that poured into that race from all sides, I'm optimistic that it will succeed and it'll be rejected, as you point out.
Yeah, one of the things that caught me today as I was following it on Twitter, one of the groups said that the union spent like somewhere between $12 and $15 million. Their numbers, I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. But they said the fact that the unions have this kind of money is the reason that you need to vote yes, because they shouldn't have that kind of money. And my mind goes to this place of, what, you mean to defend themselves against attacks from billionaires? Shouldn't have the resources to be able to stand up for their members? Is that what you really want to put out there? And truth of the matter is, yeah, that is what they want to put out.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well put. I mean, it ends up being, or maybe to comment a little bit on Janus, for my generation, our generation, this is, in fact, the most destructive attack that's fallen on all of labor at the same time. And you'd have to go back to 1947, 48, 49, when Taft-Hartley was jammed through and done over a presidential veto by Republicans and Democrats. And that was probably the last time that the labor movement in such a large way in so many places at the same time had to deal with an attack on our core right to exist.
Yep.
And now Janus will put this generation to the test. But everything that I see in my own union and other unions, everybody is reaching a tempo of activism and organizing and reorganizing that while we wouldn't have wished for this, this is at least a good thing for us to be able to take the gloves off and go back to the members and talk to them about a whole raft of things that are never a bad thing to talk about.
No, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I've said over the years, and being a labor activist, being someone who does a program like this, I'm always interested to find, people's comments, their opinions, what they know, what they don't know. And it's always been shocking to me to go into a work environment where it's a unionized environment and ask the members what union they belong to. Like I was at the RNC convention in Cleveland, and at the Gund Arena there, I think they call it the Q now. They're all the entire facility is unionized. And, I asked virtually everybody I could come across what union they belonged in, and none of them knew. And I was literally shocked at this. And the hope is that they go back and say, you know what, this is the union you're in and why you should be defending it.
No, that's right. And remember the particular, each national country, each labor movement within its country has kind of its own birth and growth and development. And ours certainly had our version of it. And we should be honest, we've had a very prosperous evolution as a labor movement along with the economy. But now that we've hit the last 20, 30 years where that's no longer the case, I think we've been slow to adapt and to reach back to our roots. And that means reaching back to the members to talk about the basic situation, certainly to be able to contrast what our work lives would be if we didn't have the union. Therefore, another way to explain why the union is a valuable commodity, a valuable membership organization. So everything I'm seeing so far has been, really gratifying. We've got in ATU public sector transit members scattered all around the United States. We also have them in Canada, but of course they're not affected in the same way by this. But what we've had is local after local, a growing number where we've reached 100% sign up, because I don't know whether folks know or think of it this way, but what Janus has essentially made us do, all unions, is go back and pretty much re-sign all of your membership. And that's a daunting logistical task, and it's a political task. And of course, in many places, we're not doing it with an employer who is ambivalent about that. So we've had to go back and reconnect member by member with our members, sign them up, and we'll continue to do that because it's going to be a laborious process that takes some time and plays out over months and months, maybe even years. But it's really begun to tap into members and that layer of folks that either have been activists or should have been activists or we need to bring back. And it's we're not sure where it's going yet, but I tend to think that it will help us on a whole host of fronts in terms of union functioning, on the political action front, on the new organizing front, on the membership front, obviously. So,
no, you're right. I mean, but to me, what you just laid out is the whole reason that I think the right went after it. It's about keeping you busy internally so that you're not affecting change externally, that you're not organizing new members, that you're not pushing for political change and moving for progressive policies, that you're spinning your wheels internally. And that's, to me, what it's all about. It has nothing to do with freedom, it has nothing to do with liberty, none of that stuff. It's just about busy work and draining resources from the unions to be able to fight for better wages, hours, conditions.
Exactly. And it should be said, Rick, we should say this more, which is that's right. And it's rooted in the fact that we have an employer class in the United States, private and public. I mean, the public sector employers are essentially taking all their leadership from the corporate world. And we should just say this once in a while, that this is, again, proof of the growing animus of those forces against even the right of labor to exist, meaning working people could get together and leverage some kind of bargaining strength to offset what is otherwise a dictatorship. Because we should confess and say this, that the workplace in the United States is a dictatorship. And we run into this all the time. In a union setting, you have various ways to deflect that or diffuse that or moderate that. But for the 95% of the workforce that works in unorganized workplaces, it's a dictatorship. And the continuing thing I'll say on this, Rick, in terms of where labor lands with this kind of a moment on us, is that many of us within the labor movement for decades now have pointed out that we do not get either any or certainly not as active enough support from Democrats when it comes to the attacks that fall on us. And the reason that that's important to mention is that you're exactly right. These attacks, among other things, exhaust us. We have to spend increasing amounts of our resources and time just defending this status quo. And when we do not receive consistent and vigorous support from the one party that gets virtually all of our support, it really tends to exhaust us. And I think that this is, I hope, a wake-up call for some of the Democrats that are at least labor-friendly. We know we have business-type Democrats that are, uninterested in really our plight. But on the other hand, I think that this moment may reinvigorate that liberal-left coalition, which has waned over the recent years.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, I have friends who are Republican union members, and they chide me all the time. Wow, the unions only give money to Democrats, and I go, yeah, because Republicans are trying to kill them. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, when you've got one place left to go, because I'm old enough to remember when there were some pro-labor Republicans. Where unions were not, the four-letter word, where it wasn't divisive, where the idea that, fighting for better wages, hours, and conditions benefited not just the members, but society as a whole. You had pro-labor Republicans. They're dinosaurs. They're gone. There aren't any left, as far as I know. Maybe one or two on the fringe. La Tourette passed away, I guess, a couple years ago. He was the last one that I knew. My problem is you're right. The Democrats haven't been that power. And look, one of my biggest problems with Obama, he looked me in the eye and I shook my hand and said, "We're going to get AFSCME done. We're going to get the Employee Free Choice Act." Still waiting on it.
No, that's right. Well, and back on this question of the Republicans and sort of their standing in recent years. We should recall that it wasn't too many years ago that we had a president, and what I'm doing here is I'm kind of replaying an old story that was retold to us by Tony Mazzocchi, the legendary leader of oil and chemical and atomic workers, and then later the Labor Party. Tony always used to have a talk which was hard to listen to, but it was all true, which was he would kind of cynically and sarcastically pine away for the good old days of Richard Nixon. And what he meant to do by this was, of course, anyone that knows anything about Nixon knows there's nothing good to pine away about there. But when it came to labor issues and healthcare issues and other things, this guy introduced OSHA. This guy introduced EPA. This guy introduced, a whole host of national healthcare plan. Yeah. And, only by pointing that out do we really realize how low the bar has sunk for so many of our Democratic lawmakers today. Now, that doesn't make them the main problem we have today. Obviously, it's Donald Trump and an energized, fanatic, ultra-right fringe, which is on the rampage. But on the other hand, there's only so much stamina amongst the ranks to sort of elect people again and again and again. You mentioned Obama. I would agree with that completely. Total disappointment. Across a whole host of issues. Nice guy. Would love to have him and his wife for next door neighbors, but certainly as a president, left a lot to be desired. And it's difficult to fire people up again and again, to get them to go back when they don't see the kind of change that they were led to believe was going to come and that what in fact they voted for. And I hope that this is a Rubicon we can cross to the labor movement at this moment and actually begin to hold these Democrats who owe their seats in many cases to the votes of union members and the support of union members to actually realize they've got to get in there and produce, if not results, they've got to produce sincere, sustained battles on our behalf.
No, because right now the backs are against the wall. I mean, I go back to this Janus decision, which I think everyone saw coming. In fact, we probably should have happened 2 years ago with the Friedrichs case when Scalia's passing. But, at the end of it, these attacks, they're not going to stop. This is, I had someone say, well, now it's all over. I go, it's not over. It's the beginning of the end. Next thing is even more busy work for you guys in that, I guess the next legislation they're trying to push is yearly recertifications.
Recertification. And Rick, we should also realize that union dues checkoff is by no means guaranteed. And again, this is rooted in the particularly virulent anti-unionism of so many of the employers historically and contemporaneously, because what it boils down to is that most of the employers in the United States, not all, but most, certainly a majority, are not ambivalent about our existence, and they've never accepted our existence. So they've essentially understood and seen their class interest for all history. We potentially become prosperous enough sometimes to not have to fight those fights. Sometimes we become distracted. Sometimes we become sucked into the charlatan's web. But on the other hand, this really is, I think, Janus is sort of a declaration the final fight with the employers. And I don't like to sound apocalyptic, but when you look at what's on the table here, the final destruction of pensions, final destruction of affordable health insurance, the final reduction of wages to an impoverished level. I mean, we've got half of the United States working population is impoverished. I mean, these are apocalyptic things to say, but they're true, and we should probably look a little more loudly and a little more boldly at the political world for solutions to this.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's going to come back to us, and which is why I keep going back to this vote in Missouri, because we were in Ohio when when issue 2 was on the ballot, and it was I think it was 69% of the state of Ohio voted for that right to work to be overturned, and I think that's about the natural rate of people believing in unions and wanting to push for it, and it comes back down to we need to be voting on that issue. I gave a speech not too long ago where I said, look, I want to see union members hold their union cards like we were led to believe the NRA members hold theirs. From my cold, dead hands, you will pry it.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you bringing up the Ohio issue, too, from some years ago, because that merits study by the activists in the labor movement, because while that was probably, in our time, Rick, one of the most stupendous successes of working people and organized labor to push back against, at that time, I believe it was John Kasich who was pushing that repeal of collective bargaining through the state.
In fact, to bring it back to you, if you remember, he said either you get on the bus or we're going to run over you.
Yeah, no, that's right. And if you remember that large majority of working people, which of course is far in excess of whatever the union membership may be in Ohio, it was a high point of resistance at that time that came in the wake of the Wisconsin events and all this. But yet, 1.5 years later, all of it lay in ruins, and we had a resurgent Republican majority in that state, and the various elements within the Democratic Party were scattered and demoralized. And it was partly because of their unwillingness to embrace an actual head-on struggle on issues like living wages, pensions, collective bargaining, the right to belong to a union. So I guess it was one of the many signposts we've had in recent years where we have too many Democrats who, for whatever reason, will see the handwriting on the wall. They don't want to read it, and they go back to the failed formulas. And that's why I think in my union we're very optimistic that a new breed is coming forward, a new vitality is coming forward, largely within the Democratic Party, but not exclusively. And that better times are coming, because we certainly need profound political change to take first the pressure off of working people, but then to begin to rebuild our country and rebuild the well-being of the working class. This is not any longer a debate over something that is a choice or a desire. No, this is basic needs now are down to the discussion. So we remain positive. I think, at least in my case, I think I'm more positive than I was last year and certainly 5 years ago. It's problematic in the sense that there's much more struggle going on, much more struggles going on. But on the other hand, that's the only way to progress.
No, and as I've said, we need a much more militant movement. We need people who are going to fold their arms and march their feet, and learn the lessons that my grandparents' generation fought and bled and died for, and passed on to us. They built the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization. It can be done. Last word for you. What are we telling people? What's the message for your members? What's the message for working people?
Well, I think both for our members and working people, I think our message, my message, Rick, is what you've been echoing here, what I've said, which is that we are truly at a tipping point here. We always like to say that, or sometimes we say that, but we really are. We have half of our population that's impoverished, oppressed in a number of other ways. It's ill-served by the decaying public, or the schools that are under attack, by the communities that are disintegrating, drugs, crime, all these things. But we can confront this. We can only confront this, though, through, concerted, active, progressive working class action. And I look forward to the next 40 of my years. When I look back on the last 40 in the movement, I look forward to the next 40 where we see real, active, fighting, working class movements on our own behalf.
From your lips, and I hope they rue the day that they ram this poison through. And we hope you shove it. Not going to go there. Chris, I appreciate
Thanks.
the time. Great talking with you, man.
Thank you.
Good stuff, Chris Townsend. Look, at the end of it, he's right. We need a much more militant movement. Anyway, Chris is the director of the Field Mobilization there with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU. Good stuff. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Me and my people are through. Me and my people are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1890. That was the day that one of the heroines of the U.S. labor movement, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, was born in Concord, New Hampshire. Elizabeth learned her progressive politics at a young age. Her father was a socialist and her mother a feminist. Elizabeth was kicked out of high school for speaking out in favor of socialism. This did not slow her down. She kept speaking and her reputation grew. She became a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. She traveled the country organizing and speaking to workers. From the Minnesota Iron Range to the textile mills of Lawrence, Massachusetts, Elizabeth was on the front lines of the labor struggle. She was arrested for her activity 10 times, but was never sentenced. During World War I, Flynn was arrested and stood trial for speaking out against the war. The experience led her to become one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, an organization dedicated to protecting freedom of speech. In the 1930s, Flynn became a member of the U.S. Communist Party, writing a regular column for the Daily Worker. But despite her personal political ideas, she supported Democratic Party President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1944. During the 1950s, she was caught up in the anti-communist hysteria led by Senator Joe McCarthy. She went to prison for 2 years for allegedly violating the Smith Act, a law against overthrowing the government. She died while on a visit to Russia in 1964. More than 20,000 people attended her funeral there. A monument to Flynn stands at the Forest Home Cemetery just outside of Chicago, where she is buried alongside the graves of Eugene Dennis, Big Bill Haywood, and the Haymarket Martyrs. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
From New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro survived an alleged assassination attempt last weekend. Government officials claim assailants detonated drones packed with explosives near Maduro as the increasingly besieged president spoke at a military parade. He escaped unharmed. Little is known for sure about Saturday's attack, though a Miami-based group known as Soldados de la Flanela, or T-shirt soldiers, has claimed responsibility. In the past year and a half, Maduro's Supreme Court justices have also faced a helicopter attack by a rogue police officer, and Maduro himself dodged a failed coup plot in May. Daniel Hellinger is a professor of international relations at Webster College in St. Louis and says the frequent attacks against Maduro show the president's weakness.
Maduro looks more vulnerable, and the videos showing soldiers scattering as the 2 alleged bombs went off doesn't really speak very well for the security forces themselves.
Moments after the alleged drone explosions, rows of troops who had been arranged directly in front of Maduro ran away instead of rushing to the president's defense or toward the site of the attack. Javier Corrales is a professor of political science at Amherst College and has written extensively on Venezuela.
Almost everything that we observed reveals, more so than a president in jeopardy, a security system that is very incompetent.
Corrales said Maduro will likely play up the threat of terrorism and paint opponents as extremists, a distortion of their true aim of holding Maduro to account for possible crimes against humanity.
What this opposition wants, its dream world, is to depose Maduro and arrest Maduro and have Maduro be tried and be asked to respond to all the injustices.
Luke Vargas, New York.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Well, the final results out of Ohio, not great, not great. Look, still in my view, a huge victory for Democrats. It looks like Danny O'Connor went down to Balderson, 50.2 to 49.3, a 1,766 vote difference. The green guy probably going to get a pass on this. He only got 1,127 votes. Even if all of the green votes would have gone to O'Connor, they still would have come up short. This, I'm not sure if this is going to trigger a recount because it is that close. But the positive out of this is this was a 36-point district. This was a district that was on nobody's radar. This was, again, in this moment, a time when the Republicans had better take notice of how bad their policies are, because this was supposed to be a sleepwalk for Balderson to walk right into this. And I'm hoping they rerun it in 3 months, and that people will have the opportunity to maybe those 1,127 don't vote for the green guy. Maybe they throw their vote behind O'Connor, and maybe another 100 or 2 or 5 show up and push it the other direction. But this is a win, regardless, because it wasn't even supposed to be close. And I look at what's going on in Missouri. Well, as they're moving down, they've already called it that it's 69% of the vote is in Missouri, and the no in Proposition A 65%. So there's no flipping it back. The math just doesn't work. So they have pushed back, and right to work is repealed in Missouri. These are really important messages going forward. These are victories for everyday working people. These are victories for us to hold our hat on and to continue to move forward. They say you organize for the long term, but you celebrate the victories along the way. This is a victory. This is one of those things you celebrate. And as November comes closer and closer, there's an opportunity to claw back some sanity and really to move this country in the right direction. This is not the country I grew up in as a kid. We're a much meaner, much angrier, much more divided country than I think we've probably been in at least in my lifetime. And we, the people, need to figure out how we move forward. Not the moneyed interests, but we, the people. A country of, for, and by we, the people. And that's why I'm thrilled to see what's going on with the Democratic Party right now. Because, look, there are some centrists, and I'm not thrilled with them. There are some corporate Democrats, certainly not thrilled with them. But there are also some really progressive voices out there who are going to push for, like Chris pointed out, Democrats didn't in 2010 push for the ACA and stand up and defend it like I thought they should have. You passed it through, run on it as you're proud as hell of it. Look at the tax bill. Republicans are running like they cured cancer with that, when all it was a giant handout to the 1%. When all it was a giant ripoff, a theft of our kids' future. But they ran on, hey, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And their knuckle-dragging minions believe it. Democrats have to run on how we make people's lives better. How we make sure that the jobs they have pay, that the health care they get is decent. That they have some retirement security. Just common sense. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, download the podcast there at the website or get the app on the smartphone. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here again tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, ricksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at The Rick Smith Show.